Hi everyone, welcome to the channel. Get ready for an exciting story that will touch your heart. Today, you will meet Ethan, a boy who, after losing his first dog, finds Max, a stray dog who gradually becomes his best friend and brings profound changes to his mother, Grace's, life. Together, they face challenges, overcome fears, and show that love and loyalty can heal even the deepest wounds. Don't miss this story of overcoming and transformation. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and let us know in the comments which city you are watching from. Let's spread moments that inspire and touch the soul together. Like the video if you also believe in the power of love. And what if love could heal the deepest wounds? Ethan, a 10-year-old boy, lives in Salt Lake City with his mother, Grace. Their life is simple and filled with challenges, but the connection between the two is immense. They face the pain of loss together, still recovering from the death of Grace's husband and their dog Milo. Though the house is filled with memories, joy seems distant. Their routine changes when a stray dog appears at the door. Ethan, seeking a new friendship, begins to feed Max, a dog that carries a look of pain and loyalty. What no one could imagine was that this transformative relationship would become the remedy that Ethan and Grace so desperately needed. Since her husband passed away, Grace struggles with the pain and fear of losing something she loves again. She watches Ethan and Max's friendship blossom, but her heart tightens at the thought of another loss. The stray dog becomes a true companion for Ethan who, after losing Milo, longs for love and loyalty. Max returns to Ethan some of the happiness he thought he had lost forever. Their connection deepens, and the bond between the boy and the dog becomes unbreakable, but Grace's internal struggle persists. When Max gets hurt and needs veterinary care, Grace finds herself in a dilemma. The pressure from a neighbor, Mr. Dupuis, who disapproves of Max's presence, increases. He demands that the dog be removed from the neighborhood, and Grace finds herself torn between her son's happiness and social expectations. She fears that by allowing Max to stay, she is condemning Ethan to more pain. Tension rises in the house, and the love between mother and son is tested. The situation reaches a critical point when Max goes missing. Desperate, Ethan embarks on a frantic search, facing the fear that his friend may be gone forever. Grace, anguished, joins forces with her son to find Max, recognizing that the search for him is also a search for healing and hope. The suspense grows as they explore every corner of the park where it all began, fearing the worst. When Max is finally found, the connection between them is revealed. Ethan and Max chose each other, and this relationship is the key for Grace to understand that Max is not just a dog. He is an essential link to the family's healing. Grace's decision to adopt Max is not just a matter of obligation, but a step toward acceptance and renewed love. Thus, the story of Ethan to Grace and Max becomes a powerful lesson about the importance of unconditional love and acceptance. Amid challenges and insecurities, they learn that even in times of pain, the connection between living beings can offer the strength needed to face any adversity. And by embracing this new reality, they transform their home into a place of joy, acceptance, and new beginnings, where happiness is once again possible. The small community, which initially resisted, begins to support this new dynamic, proving that sometimes love can overcome even the greatest fears. Ethan always believed that life in Salt Lake City could be simple and peaceful. However, since the death of his father and Milo, the dog who was his faithful companion, the city seemed to have lost its colors. He ventured into the park near his home, but the laughter and play that used to sound loud and cheerful were now just distant echoes. The boy, at only 10 years old, felt a deep emptiness that seemed impossible to fill. When Max, the stray dog, appeared, something inside Ethan reignited. The friendship that formed between them was like a breath of life in a home suffocating from pain. However, Ethan's happiness did not reflect so simply on Grace's face. Ethan's mother looked at the new friendship with a mix of joy and apprehension. She knew that Max brought smiles to her son's face, but she also felt the weight of responsibility. What if something happened to him? The pain of losing another loved one was a burden Grace was not willing to carry again. While Ethan devoted himself to caring for Max, Grace found herself fighting her own demons. Mr. Dupuis, a grumpy and inflexible neighbor, did not hesitate to express his discontent. To him, A stray dog had no place in a neighborhood like theirs. He made a point of emphasizing that Max could be a threat, that he could bring problems and chaos. With each visit he made to their house, Grace's heart tightened and insecurity settled in. She wondered if she was doing the right thing by allowing Max to be part of their lives. On a sunny afternoon, while Ethan played in the yard with Max, Grace decided it was time to talk to her son. She sat down beside him, and with a worried look, said, "Ethan, you know Mr. Dupuis doesn't like Max, right? He thinks he shouldn't be here." The boy looked at his mother, confused. "But Mom, he's my friend. He needs us." Ethan's innocence was palpable, and Grace felt a wave of guilt for wanting to take that moment of happiness away from her son. The situation became even more complicated when Max got hurt while playing with Ethan. The dog started limping, and worry took over the house. Grace immediately thought about the cost of the veterinarian and the possibility that Mr. Dupuis might use this against them. Fear consumed her, and she hesitated to take Max for treatment. Ethan, on the other hand, was desperate to help his friend. He didn't understand what was happening with his mother, but he felt that something was wrong. "Please, Mom, we need to take Max to the vet. He's hurt and needs help." Ethan pleaded, his eyes full of tears. Grace saw the pain in her son's eyes and, even though she was reluctant, decided that he was right. They couldn't let Max suffer. On the way to the vet, the silence was heavy. Ethan held Max's leash tightly while Grace struggled with her emotions. She feared that this was the first step toward another painful loss. The thought of losing Max left her distressed. But at the same time, she knew she couldn't deprive Ethan of his friend. When they arrived at the clinic, the atmosphere was welcoming, but Grace couldn't relax. She watched every move the vets made, every word they exchanged, and her heart raced. Ethan, on the other hand, was focused on Max, gently stroking his head and whispering words of comfort. The connection between them was palpable, and Grace began to understand that Max was more than just a dog. He was a bearer of love and hope. After the appointment, Max was diagnosed with a mild injury, but would need care and rest. Ethan was relieved and decided that he would do everything he could to take care of his friend. In that moment, Grace realized that Ethan's happiness was intertwined with Max's presence. The love that had blossomed between the two was something true and powerful, and she couldn't let fear pull her away from this new reality. However, the tension with Mr. Dupuis didn't go away. He continued to pressure them, insisting that Max didn't belong in the neighborhood. Grace felt cornered and, in a moment of weakness, began to question whether she was doing the right thing. The external pressure and her own fears made her waver, and she didn't know if she would be strong enough to protect her son and the dog that meant so much to him. The nights grew longer. While Ethan dreamed of adventures with Max, Grace spent hours awake, thinking about the choices she needed to make. She was at a turning point, where her love for her son and the protection she wanted for him caused her internal conflict. Each day, the pain of losing her husband and Milo mingled with the possibility of a new beginning, and Grace wondered, would she be able to love again, even with fear always lurking? Grace felt the weight of responsibilities on her shoulders. The worry for Max and the pressure from Mr. Dupuis left her exhausted. Each passing day, the need to protect Ethan and his new friend grew more intense, but the fear of losing once again controlled her. The dog had brought a little light into Ethan's life, but the shadow of pain still hung over her. At school, Ethan tried to maintain his routine, but the situation at home began to affect his performance. He distracted himself during lessons, thinking about Max and how he could help the dog recover. His heart was torn between the joy of playing with his new friend and the sadness that his mother seemed to carry. Grace's insecurity manifested in worried glances and conversations that Ethan couldn't fully understand. He just wanted everything to go back to normal, but normalcy seemed further away than ever. The tension increased when Grace decided it was time to take Ethan and Max to an animal adoption fair happening at the local park. She wanted Ethan to see other dogs and have fun, but at the same time, she feared that the event would awaken more desires in her son's heart. As they walked through the park, Grace watched Ethan interact with the other animals, his radiant smile. Max's tail wagged happily, and the sight of the dog playing with other dogs brought a lightness to the mother's heart. However, the day took an unexpected turn when Mr. Dupuis appeared. He approached Grace with a severe look, as if he were on a mission. "I can't believe you brought that dog to the park. He shouldn't be here," he said. his voice laden with disdain. Ethan, who was nearby, felt the tension in the air. The smile he had faded in an instant. Grace tried to remain calm, but indignation rose to her head. She didn't want fear and anger to dominate her life, but the neighbor's words hurt her. "Max is a gentle dog, and he's part of our family now," Grace replied, trying to keep her composure. Mr. Dupuis didn't seem satisfied. He continued to press her, talking about the rules of the neighborhood and how Max could be a threat to everyone's safety. With each word, Grace felt her heart tighten. The feeling of being judged and criticized was unbearable, and she realized that the situation was becoming unsustainable. Ethan, sensing the growing tension, tried to intervene. "He's just a dog, sir. He just wants to play." The desperation in her son's voice made Grace look at him, and for a moment, all she wanted was to protect him from more pain. Ethan's gaze, filled with hope and trust, touched her heart. But deep down, Grace questioned whether she was doing the right thing by allowing Max into their lives. After that encounter, the relationship between Grace and Mr. Dupuis deteriorated. He became a constant reminder of her insecurities. Every time she saw him, guilt and fear resurfaced. Grace began to avoid the park, fearing that Mr. Dupuis might appear again. Ethan's life, which had seemed so full of possibilities with Max, began to shrink. The boy felt the change and wondered why his mother was pulling away. The emotional impact of this situation became evident when Ethan started to feel isolated. The joy that Max brought to his life was mixed with sadness for his mother, who seemed more distant by the day. He didn't understand why Grace hesitated to let Max be a part of their lives. His mother's internal struggles directly affected his mood. He wanted her to see that Max was not just a dog, he was a bridge to the happiness they had lost. The nights became more distressing. While Ethan dreamed of adventures alongside Max, Grace found herself awake, trapped in thoughts about her choices. Memories of the past haunted her, and she wondered if she was ready to open her heart again. The guilt of allowing Max into their lives grew with each passing day, and the thought of losing another loved one paralyzed her. In a moment of reflection, Grace decided she needed to confront her fears. She reached out to the veterinarian who had treated Max and asked for advice on how to take better care of the dog. The conversation was a small relief, and for the first time in weeks, she felt she could take charge of the situation. After all, what she desired most was Ethan's happiness. However, Grace's journey was far from over. The internal conflict and external pressures continued to threaten the happiness she was starting to rebuild. Every day, she wondered if she could find a balance between protecting her son and opening her heart to love. The road ahead was uncertain, and the choice between safety and love became increasingly difficult. Grace woke up one rainy morning, feeling the weight of the clouds outside reflecting what was going on in her heart. She looked to the side and saw Ethan, still sleeping peacefully, with Max curled up at his feet. The image was a relief amid the whirlwind of emotions that consumed her, but at the same time, the memory of Mr. Dupuis and his cruel words tormented her. The idea of losing the freedom to have Max in their lives left her restless. As she prepared for the day, Grace decided she could not go on like this. She needed to face her fears and the pressure she felt. With a deep sigh, she decided that on that morning, she would go to the park again, even knowing that Mr. Dupuis might show up. It was time to show Ethan that Max was part of the family, and that they would not hide. When they arrived at the park, Grace felt her heart race. The laughter and barking of the dogs filled the air, but the tension was palpable. Ethan was excited, pulling Max to play with the other dogs. Grace watched from a distance, admiring her son's joy, but her mind was elsewhere. What would happen if Mr. Dupuis showed up? She didn't want to cause more trouble, but the need to give Ethan a moment of happiness was stronger. Then, suddenly, the atmosphere of the park changed. A group of dogs began to run toward Max, and amid the commotion, one of the other dogs, a large German shepherd, approached abruptly. Max, startled, started barking, but soon felt insecure and backed away. Grace, realizing what was happening, ran toward her son and the dog. "Ethan, stay calm," Grace shouted, but the scene unfolded rapidly. Max, frightened, began to run, and Ethan, in a burst of impulse, followed his friend. The German shepherd, for its part, seemed just curious, but Max had no way of knowing that. The dog fled toward a corner of the park, and Ethan, without thinking twice, dashed after him. Grace's heart raced. She saw Ethan disappear among the trees, and fear took over her. "Ethan! Max!" she shouted, but her voice seemed to echo into a void. Panic overwhelmed her, and Grace ran after them, her feet pounding on the wet ground, feeling the adrenaline rise. When she finally caught up with Ethan, she found them in a clearing. Max was trembling, but Ethan was hugging him tightly. Ethan's expression was filled with concern, and the sight broke Grace's heart. He was so determined to protect the dog that he didn't care what might happen. In that moment, reality hit her like a punch to the gut. "It's okay, my love," Grace said, kneeling beside Ethan. "You're safe, and so is Max." She petted the dog, who was beginning to relax slowly. But Ethan's look, filled with fear and confusion, made Grace reconsider everything she had done. What was she really trying to protect? The love they had for Max, or her own insecurities? The image of Ethan, so willing to face anything for his friend, made Grace realize she was suffocating his happiness with her own fears. She didn't want fear to control her anymore. After all, life was about taking risks, and true safety didn't come from the absence of challenges but from the ability to face them with love. Looking at Ethan, Grace felt a wave of determination. "Let's take Max home and give him a warm bath," she said, smiling. "Then we can make dog treats together." The smile on Ethan's face lit up the park, and Max, sensing the change in energy, wagged his tail. As they returned home, Grace felt she had taken an important step. The journey would still be challenging, but she was willing to face her fears. Life couldn't be perfect, but it could be filled with love, even with its imperfections. The experience made her understand that sometimes what we fear the most is what can bring the greatest happiness. Grace knew that the road ahead would still have obstacles, but now she was ready to face them, not just as a mother, but as someone who also deserved to be happy. And more importantly, she was determined to allow Ethan and Max to live fully, together, creating new memories and overcoming any challenges that might arise. Grace felt a lightness in her heart as she walked home with Ethan and Max. The rain had eased, and a soft light filtered through the clouds as if the sky were smiling at them. The image of Ethan with his radiant smile and Max wagging his tail happily made her realize that the little joys were what truly mattered. However, the feeling of relief was soon accompanied by a shadow of concern. The memory of Mr. Dupuis and his threat still loomed over her. When they arrived home, Grace decided she needed to share her fears with Ethan. Sitting at the kitchen table, she looked into her son's eyes. "Ethan, I want you to know that I am here to support you. Max is part of our family, and we will always protect him." The boy nodded, but Grace noticed there was something more in his gaze, a silent worry that made her feel a knot in her stomach. "But what if Mr. Dupuis comes back?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling a little. "What if he tries to take Max away?" Grace took a deep breath. It was a valid question, and for a moment, she felt lost. "I don't know what he will do, but I promise I will do everything I can to protect you." The answer was not enough to eliminate the fear in Ethan's eyes, and that left her distressed. After a busy day, Grace decided she needed some time alone to think. She stepped outside to the garden where the rain had left the air fresh and clean. She sat on a bench and watched Max play with some falling leaves. The scene made her smile, but soon the smile faded as she remembered what was at stake. How could she ensure Ethan and Max's safety? Grace's mind began to wander. She thought about talking to neighbors and friends, seeking support and advice. If Mr. Dupuis was really after them, perhaps she would have to gather allies. The idea of having to face the man alone made her nervous, but she knew she couldn't let fear take over. In the days that followed, Grace began to meet with some mothers from the neighborhood. They became a strong group, united by their experiences and daily challenges. During one of those meetings, Grace decided to share the situation with Mr. Dupuis. The other mothers listened attentively, and one of them, Clara, offered to help her. "Let's keep an eye on the park," Clara suggested. "If he shows up, we'll be there to support you and Ethan." Grace felt warmth in her heart. The solidarity of those women made her realize she was not alone in this battle. Together, they could become a protective barrier. Ethan, on the other hand, was more excited than ever. He and Max began to explore the neighborhood more, meeting new dogs and their owners. The boy seemed to be overcoming his fears, although Grace noticed moments when worry still crept in. She tried to be an example of courage, but inside, uncertainty continued to unsettle her. One night, while Grace was preparing dinner, Ethan entered the kitchen with a serious look. "Mom, what if Mr. Dupuis comes here?" The question was direct and disarming. Grace stopped what she was doing and turned to him. "If that happens, Ethan, we will stick together. You and me. Max, too. Remember what we talked about being a team?" Grace tried to convey confidence, but she felt the tension rising. Ethan nodded, but fear was still present. That night, as she prepared for bed, Grace looked out the window. The rain had resumed, and she remembered the morning she decided to go to the park. What had seemed like an act of rebellion had now become a symbol of strength, but the battle was far from over. The idea of facing Mr. Dupuis made her anxious, and she knew she needed to prepare. The next morning, Grace decided it was time to act. She made a few calls and managed to schedule a meeting with a lawyer. Talking about the situation made her feel stronger, as if she were finally taking control of her life. As she prepared for the meeting, she recalled Clara's words, "Never underestimate the power of community." Grace realized that even amid fear and uncertainty, there was a path forward. She was not alone. She had the love of Ethan and Max, and now a support network encouraging her to fight. Thus, with renewed determination, Grace felt ready to face whatever came her way, not just for the safety of Ethan and Max, but also for her own freedom and happiness. Life, with all its challenges, still had much to offer. Grace was at a turning point in her life. Since Mr. Dupuis had threatened to take Max, her beloved dog, a shadow of uncertainty had settled in her heart. However, something within her began to change. With each passing day, she felt stronger and more willing to face whatever lay ahead. The presence of Ethan, her son, and the unconditional love of Max were like beacons of hope guiding her. The meetings with the neighborhood mothers became an important support point for Grace. She realized that the solidarity among them was not just a form of protection, but also a source of strength. By sharing her concerns, Grace began to understand that she was not alone. The other mothers also had their battles and, together, formed a support network that encouraged her to confront her fears. This unity helped Grace trust herself more. She realized that asking for help was not a sign of weakness, but rather a powerful strength. As time passed, Grace began to apply what she had learned. Instead of letting fear dominate her actions, she decided to be proactive. The meeting with the lawyer was a milestone in her journey. Hearing the legal advice made Grace feel that she was indeed taking the reins of her life. The feeling of control, even if small, was invigorating. Grace realized that each step she took brought her closer to a secure future for herself and Ethan. Grace's internal transformation was not limited to her fight against Mr. Dupuis. She began to see life from a new perspective. What once seemed like a burden was now an opportunity for growth. She understood that success was not about having a problem-free life, but rather about being able to overcome challenges and learn from them. True success lay in her resilience and her ability to rise again, even after setbacks. One of the most important lessons Grace learned was about the importance of accepting help. Throughout her life, she had always strived to be independent and strong, but now she understood that strength also meant knowing when to seek support. Clara and the other mothers not only offered comfort, but also became her friends and confidants. This unexpected friendship evolved, helping Grace grow and understand that vulnerability was a natural part of life. There were moments when insecurity still accompanied her. When Ethan asked about Mr. Dupuis, Grace felt the old fear resurface, but now she had tools to deal with it. Instead of allowing herself to be overwhelmed, she took a deep breath and talked to Ethan about her emotions. This not only helped the boy feel safe, but also allowed Grace to reconnect with her own inner strength. Each conversation, each moment of vulnerability, was an opportunity for growth that strengthened the bond between mother and son. Life began to rebalance. Grace noticed that even amid the emotional storm, there was room for small joys. Walks in the park with Ethan and Max became sacred moments where laughter and lightness returned to their lives. Grace learned to cherish these little things, realizing that each smile from Ethan and each playful move from Max were signs that life continued despite the challenges. When the rain stopped and the sun shone again, Grace looked out the window and felt a new understanding emerge within her. She had faced her fears and, in doing so, had transformed. She was no longer just a worried mother. She was a strong woman capable of fighting for her family. The wisdom gained along the way made her realize that life, with its adversities, offered valuable lessons. And now, Grace was ready to face whatever came her way, not only for Ethan and Max's safety but also for her own happiness. The journey was not free of obstacles, but Grace knew that each challenge made her stronger. It was a new era of self-confidence and courage, where she not only accepted help from others but also allowed herself to be vulnerable. Life, now, was more than just overcoming difficulties. It was a celebration of the small victories that made each day special. And so, with a light heart and a renewed mind, Grace felt that she was finally on the right path. Looking out the window, Grace saw the sky covered with clouds. The day seemed gloomy, reflecting the storm brewing in her heart. Today would be the day she faced Mr. Dupuis in court. The mere thought of being face to face with him made her stomach twist. But at the same time, there was a flame of determination inside her, a certainty that she could no longer back down. Beside her, Ethan sat on the couch, distracted with Max, who was happily playing with a toy. That scene of pure happiness was all Grace needed to remember why she was fighting. Upon arriving at the courthouse, the atmosphere was heavy. She saw Mr. Dupuis, with his arrogant smile, surrounded by his lawyers. His presence sent a chill down her spine. But Grace remembered all the conversations she had with Clara and the other mothers. They encouraged her, shared their own stories of overcoming, and helped her see that true strength was not in not feeling fear, but in acting despite it. When the judge entered, Grace took a deep breath. The moment to present her case would come soon. The first witness was called, and Grace felt her heart race. It was one of the neighbors who had witnessed Dupuis' threats. His voice was steady as he recounted the events, and each word felt like a balm for Grace's soul. The community was with her. Finally, it was Grace's turn. She stood up, feeling her legs tremble, but each step toward the table reminded her of Max and Ethan, of their joy and innocence. Grace began to speak, her voice a bit hesitant at first, but soon it grew stronger. She laid out her reasons, not just as a mother wanting to protect her child and her dog, but as a woman who had fought against her fears and found her voice. The room was silent, everyone listening intently. I am a mother, and my role is to protect my child. Max is not just a pet, he is part of our family. He brings joy and love to our lives, and I cannot let Mr. Dupuis's fear separate us. The emotion in Grace's voice touched everyone in the courtroom. She was not just speaking for herself, she was representing all the mothers fighting to do what is right. Mr. Dupuis, irritated, tried to interrupt but the judge did not allow it. She urged Grace to continue, giving her more strength. With each word, Grace felt the chains of fear breaking. She was no longer alone. She felt the support of her friends, her community, and, above all, her own heart. When she finished, she looked at the judge, feeling that she had done what was right. The silence in the room was palpable, but Grace knew she had planted a seed of doubt in Mr. Dupuis's mind. And more importantly, she had sown certainty in her own heart. After the closing statements, the judge retired to deliberate. Grace turned to Ethan, who was watching her with admiration. She smiled at him, and in that moment, the fear that had accompanied her throughout the process began to dissipate. Regardless of the outcome, she had won an internal battle that had followed her for a long time. Finally, the judge returned and made his announcement. The decision was in favor of Grace. Relief and joy washed over her like a tsunami. She turned to Ethan, who hugged her tightly, and Max, who seemed to sense the happiness, ran in circles around them. Grace felt tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of joy. She had overcome her greatest challenge. As she left the courthouse, Grace realized that her journey had not only been about the fight for Max, but about rediscovering her own strength. She had learned that vulnerability was not weakness, but an essential part of life. By accepting help and sharing her struggles, she found support and unconditional love. That day, Grace was not just a woman who had won a legal battle. She was a strong mother, a loyal friend, and a woman who had learned to cherish life. Looking to the future, she knew that challenges would still come, but she was ready to face them, head held high and heart full of courage. Life was a journey, and she was determined to live it fully, surrounded by the friendships formed amid the struggle and by the family that would always be her greatest motivation. After the judge's decision, Grace felt light, as if a huge weight had been lifted from her shoulders. As she walked out of the courthouse, her thoughts were in a whirlwind. The victory was not just about Max, but about everything she had faced up to that point. The support she had received from the community made her realize that she was not alone in that fight. The mothers who had shared their stories with her now formed a network of strength and solidarity. Ethan, by her side, held her hand firmly. He looked her in the eyes, filled with pride. "You were amazing, Grace. I knew you could do it," he said with a sincere smile. Grace smiled back, but a feeling of unease still accompanied her. What would come next? What did this mean for them as a family? On the way home, Grace thought about how things could have been different if she hadn't found the courage to fight. The look of Max, her faithful dog, as he ran around them, brought a smile to her face. He was not just a pet, he was a symbol of her struggle, a constant reminder that love could conquer fear. Even amid all the pain and uncertainty, Max had always been there, full of joy and unconditional love. When they arrived home, the atmosphere was different. The home now felt like a place of celebration, not just for the victory in court, but for the recovery of Grace's spirit. She crouched down and hugged Max, feeling the softness of his fur and the warmth radiating from him. "You are a true hero, Max," she whispered, as he wagged his tail, as if he understood every word. In the days that followed, Grace began to realize the impact her struggle had caused in her life and in her community. The mothers who had supported her journey were now coming together more than ever. They met regularly to discuss not only their concerns, but also to share moments of joy. It was as if a light had been lit, uniting them in an even stronger bond. One day, while they were sitting in a park with the children and dogs playing around, one of the mothers, Clara, turned to Grace. "You really inspired us, Grace. Your courage gave us strength to face our own challenges. Thank you for fighting for us," she said, her eyes shining with gratitude. Grace felt a wave of emotion. She had never imagined that her personal struggle could have such a big impact. As life went on, Grace dedicated herself to building a safe space for the children and animals in the community. She began organizing events to promote the importance of animal protection and awareness of pet owners' rights. Her story became an example of strength and resilience, and many other mothers began to feel empowered to fight for what they believed in. Ethan also felt the effects of the change. He supported Grace every step of the way, participating in events and helping to bring more people together. Their partnership grew stronger, and they began to dream of creating a community space where families could come together, learn, and support each other. "Together, we can make a difference," Ethan always said, and Grace agreed, feeling that now, more than ever, they had a purpose. At night, as Grace sat on her couch, watching Max sleep in his favorite spot, she reflected on the journey she had taken. The fear that had once dominated her seemed so distant. She had found her voice, and in doing so, she had rediscovered herself. Life was full of challenges, but now Grace knew she had the strength to face them, and that she would never be alone. The joy and peace she felt were palpable. The court's decision was just the beginning. Grace understood that by fighting for Max and she had fought for herself and for everyone she loved. And so, with her heart full of gratitude and hope, she prepared to face the future, convinced that any storm could be overcome with love and courage. Grace looked around, feeling more connected than ever with the mothers and their children who had now become part of her life. The struggle that once felt so solitary had transformed into a vibrant community, full of support and love. The victory in court was not just a personal achievement, but the beginning of a movement that helped unite people facing similar challenges. The transformation in Grace was remarkable. She transformed from a frightened woman, afraid of losing her beloved dog, into an inspiring leader who helped empower other women to stand up for what they believed in. The meetings in the park became a weekly ritual. The children played while the adults discussed not only animal rights, but also their own personal struggles. Grace realized that each story shared was a step toward healing. Her own experience, which once left her vulnerable, was now a source of strength. she began to understand that her past, with its flaws and fears, did not define her, but rather shaped her into a better version of herself. Ethan, always by her side, saw how Grace's confidence grew. They planned events together that not only promoted the cause but also strengthened family bonds. The dream community space began to take shape. It was a place where people could learn, connect, and support each other. Grace knew that by creating this space, she was correcting a past mistake, the feeling of being alone in her struggle. Now, she was creating a home for those who needed support. As the months passed, the impact of Grace's journey spread throughout the community. More mothers began to join, bringing their stories, fears, and hopes. What started as an act of love for a dog became a movement of empowerment. Grace reflected on the true meaning of success. It wasn't just about winning a case in court, but about creating a support network that helped everyone find their voices. On a sunny afternoon, as the children played and Max happily ran around, Grace had a moment of clarity. She understood that by facing her fears, she not only redeemed herself but also helped others find courage in their own lives. Redemption was not just about correcting mistakes. It was about transforming pain into learning and growth. With a heart full of gratitude, Grace sat and watched the scene before her. That was the true essence of life: connection, love, and overcoming. She smiled as she realized her journey had led her to a place where she could help others walk their own paths of light. And now, she invited everyone to reflect on their own stories. Each of us has a struggle, and every voice matters, she thought. It was time to take action. If you have also faced challenges, share your experiences. Together, we can create a safe space for everyone. Don't hesitate to like and subscribe for more inspiring stories. Your interaction is crucial for more people to feel seen and heard. Change begins with a step, and each of us can be part of that transformation. What moment in this story touched your heart the most? We would love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and share your reflections with us. Your perspective is essential to us and helps us bring more touching stories like this one. If you know someone who might be moved by this story, don't hesitate to share the video with them. Let's spread this message of love and overcoming. And if you love soul-stirring stories, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to be the first to know when we release new videos. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave a like. We look forward to reading your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next touching story.